Hi there, I'm Kareem from Animal Solutions, and in this two-part video tutorial I will show you how to use Paradym to issue and verify an achievement credential. For those who don't know, Paradym is a platform that simplifies the creation of self-sovereign identity workflows by abstracting away the complexities that normally come with implementing self-sovereign identity solutions and offering a easy-to-understand YAML interface. In this first part of the tutorial, we will look at issuance. We have a very simple snake game set up in the browser, and players who beat the high score will be awarded a credential for that achievement. And in the second part of the tutorial, we will create a custom Discord server with a private channel that can only be accessed by presenting that same credential. Without further ado, let's get started. So before we dive into the code, let's have a look at the end result. So here before us, we have a very simple Paradym snake game. And as you can see at the bottom, the high score is currently set to 1. We can start the game by pressing one of the arrow keys, and we'll go for the food. That's 1. And that is 2. Now, if we are game over, we will be presented with a congratulations screen, and after a little bit, we will be redirected to a Paradym page. And this shows a QR code that we can scan with our wallet. This can be the Paradym wallet or any other compatible wallet. I have my Paradym wallet here, fresh Paradym wallet loaded up, so I can scan the QR code with my wallet. And here we can see that we are offered a credential with the high score set to 2 and the timestamp of when I beat the high score, so I'll accept that. And here it is, it's added to my wallet. So let's dive into the code and let's have a look at how this works in Paradym first. All right, so let's get started. In front of us, we have a newly created Paradym account that we'll use to work out the workflows for our use case. So for this use case, we'll need 2 separate workflows. First, we need a workflow to register a credential template. A credential template basically defines the structure of the credential that we want to issue and the individual attributes inside of the credential. And secondly, we need a workflow to connect to the user's wallet and after that issue the credential. So let's get started with registering the credential template. To create a new workflow, I click the New Workflow button, and this will present us with the workflow editor. If we move over to the left, there is a Templates tab, which will give us various credential or workflow templates to choose from. At the top, we see that there is a Create Credential Template workflow template. So we'll use that. Click Use Template, and we'll confirm it by pressing Override. And here we have the workflow template loaded up. This template is actually, we can use this template without modifying it. And in order to run it, we first have to publish it. And once the workflow is published, we can run the workflow by pressing the Run button here. Now we are presented with a form that we can use to specify the details of the credential that we want to issue. So the first thing we have to specify is the name of the credential that we want to issue. In this case, we want to issue a high score credential. So we'll give it a descriptive name, high score badge, for instance. Next, we have to specify the network that we want to use. So a credential template under the hood will register a credential schema and a credential definition to a ledger. Currently, there are 2 types of ledgers or networks supported by Paradym, and that is the checked testnet and the checked mainnet. The checked testnet is free of charge and is meant for development purposes, so we'll keep it at that for now. Next, we have to specify the template version. So since this is the first time that we are publishing this credential template, we'll keep it at 1.0. But if we want to update, make updates to the template in the future, then we have to increase this version number. Lastly, we have to specify the attribute names. So these are the actual attributes that will be included in the credential that we are going to issue. As we saw earlier when we received the credential in the wallet, there are two attributes. One is the high score, so the value of the high score itself, as well as a timestamp indicating when the high score was beaten. So we'll go in here, we'll say high score, and we'll add a new timestamp attribute as well. All right, so now everything is set up. We can execute the workflow. This will give us the workflow executions page, and that we can use to track the execution itself. On the top right here, we can see that the workflow is currently running, and as we can see here, the view is incrementally updated whenever an action is completed. So here we can see that it created a schema, gives us the schema identifier, and in a bit, it will also tell us that the credential definition was created, and the credential definition identifier can be copied here. We'll use that later on in our second workflow, but for now we keep it at this. So let's move on to the second workflow. Great. So with the credential template set up, we can move on to the implementation of our second workflow, which will be the workflow that creates a connection with the user wallet, and after that issues the credential. So I'm back at the workflow overview page here, and to create a new workflow, I will press the new workflow button. Here we have, again, the workflow editor. And if we move over to the templates tab, we can see that there's also an issuance template available. In this case, it issues a employee badge, but we can modify that to fit our use case. So we'll use this template. We'll click overwrite. And here we have the template. So templates are quite a convenient way to start writing your workflows, because they give you an idea of how to structure the workflow, as well as the actions that are involved. So let's start at the top. Every workflow has a name, which we can see here. The name of the workflow is also displayed here, as well as in the overview, the workflow overview page. It's just a title to help us separate the different workflows we create. So we'll give it a more of a descriptive name. So we'll say issue high score badge. All right, next up we have the trigger. Just as before, the trigger is set to API. Again, this allows us to either run the workflow manually by clicking the run button after the workflow is published, but it also allows us to trigger the workflow by calling the Paradym API, which in our case is exactly what we want, because we want our snake game to trigger this workflow whenever a player beats the high score. Great. So after that, we have the inputs object. The inputs object allows us to specify attributes, properties, or information that is required to run the workflow. So in our case, when we registered the credential template in the previous workflow, we included two attributes in the credential template. That was high score and the timestamp. So we want this information to be provided by the snake game. So if we modify this inputs object, I'll just paste it in here quickly, to include those two attributes. Now these attributes will be part of the request body that is provided by the snake game. So in this case, we have the inputs object itself is an object, so we'll have to specify that. Then we have the properties section, and in this properties section, we can define the actual attributes that we need in our workflow. So here I set it to high score, This is a typo, and this is a typo as well. So we have one attribute that's called high score. You can give it a title and a description. These are basically used to format it nicely in the user wallet after the credential has been received. And it also has a string or a type property that is set to string. There are multiple types available, but for the ease of use, we'll just keep it at string right now. The same goes for timestamp. We can give it a title, description, and a type. And finally, we specify which attributes are required. By default, everything is optional. And to make them required, we have to include them into this array. So next up, we have the actions. Before we can issue a credential to a user or the user's wallet, we need a connection with that wallet. The first action is exactly about this. So when the workflow is triggered, it will first run the create connection action, and this create connection action will run, and after it's completed, it will output a connection invitation. This connection invitation can be used to generate a QR code from, and this QR code, if scanned by the user's wallet, will initiate the connection or the process of setting up a connection between Paradym and the user's wallet. Once that connection is created, we can move on and do stuff with that connection. For example, issue the credential. So after this action has been completed, the workflow execution will halt, and it will actually wait for the invitation to be accepted by the user's wallet. After that has happened, the workflow will start running again, and it will move on with the second action, which in this case is the issuance of the credential. In order to issue a credential, we need a few things. We need to specify the connection ID. So where do we, to what connection do we actually want to issue this credential? This has been set to the $sign actions create connection output connection.connection ID. And what this is referencing is the $sign basically means this workflow. Then we have actions. Well, this array is the actions array. The create connection keyword is the identifier we have specified here. This can be anything you want, but they have to be the same. Every action creates an output. So we reference the output, the outputs of the actions by appending .output after it. And then we have connection, which is an object that contains a connection ID. How these outputs are structured can be found in the documentation of Paradym, and that will give you an idea of how to reference various output attributes of the independent actions. All right, so now we know where we want to issue the credential to. Now we need to specify information about the credential we actually want to issue. So that consists of two parts. We have the credential definition ID. The credential definition ID is a output property of the credential when we register the credential template. So in order to obtain this, we will have to go back to the overview page. We'll go here to our previous workflow, and we can navigate to executions. If we click the execution, we get the information of the execution, and then again here we have the credential definition ID. So by clicking this string, we can copy it. It's quite convenient. And now we have to paste it in the workflow we were working on. Instead of going back to the overview page, I can also navigate by clicking the select box, which is kind of neat. All right, so we'll paste in the credential definition ID we just copied. And now we'll have to state the attributes. So again, we had two attributes. One was the timestamp, and the other one was the high score. So I will paste those two in. The high score, the timestamp, and here, instead of referencing another action of this workflow, we are referencing the inputs object that we defined on the top. All right. So this workflow is set and done. We can publish it. And now it has been published and it's ready to be used. Great. So now we have both workflows set up, and we can move on to integrating those workflows into the actual Snake game. So before we can trigger a workflow from our Snake game through Paradym's REST API, we first need to create an API key. And to do that, we head over to the settings page. And here on the left, if we create API keys, we can create a new API key. So we'll call this Snake Server, because that is the component that will be making the request. We'll press create, and here we can copy the API key. If we move over to our project, this project will be available for you to download as a Git repository in the description. The project, it's a monorepo that is comprised of two components: the client, that is actually the thing that the game that we previously saw in the browser, as well as the server. In this case, we're only interested in the server because that will be the component that will be interacting with Paradym. So if we open this server folder, then we see a .env file, and we need to configure 3 variables in order to make this work. So the first thing is the API key that we just copied over. When we trigger a workflow from the API, the response, the workflow starts running, and the request response is returned immediately. So in order to keep track of the state of the workflow and where it's at, and to get actual useful information from the workflow, we can set up a webhook listener. Whenever the workflow stage changes or an action is completed, Paradym will emit a webhook event or a webhook request that we can use to keep track of where the execution is at. So in order to do this, we need to go back to the settings page. And here on the left below API keys, there is a webhooks option. So we'll click that. And here we can add a webhook URL. So because I am running this on a local host, I will use Ngrok, which is a tunneling service, and I'll point it to port 3000, and that's just because we are running the server on port 3000. So if I run this, I will get a URL, and I can copy this URL, and we'll go back into Paradym and paste it here. So the server has, if we go into the source directory, it has a few endpoints set up. It has a high score get and a high score post endpoint. Those are used by the front end to get the current high score and to post a new high score. But we also have a webhook post, and this is the webhook endpoint we have set up for Paradym. And if we go into that, we can see that that is running on webhooks. So if we go back into Paradym, we will have to say /webhook. We'll give it a name, again, snake server, because that is the component that is that's actually running it. It's created. And now we get a signature back. So the signature is used to verify the authenticity of the webhook events and to make sure that the webhook events are actually coming from Paradym and it's not the webhook endpoint is not called by another client or server or component. So great. Now we have that signature copied. I go back into Visual Studio Code, close this. I will close this. Oops. Close this as well. And here we have the HMAC signature where I will paste that in. Finally, we need to provide the workflow ID, which is the identifier of the workflow that we want to trigger. In this case, if we go back to Paradym, we go back to the overview page. The workflow we want to trigger is the issue high score badge workflow. So if we open that workflow up, on the left here, we see the workflow identifier, which we can click to copy it. And again, back into Visual Studio Code, we'll paste it in here. Great. Now we should be all set up. And we should be able to run the snake game and get a credential issued to us successfully. So let's give it a try. So in order to run the project, I've opened up a new terminal. Remember to keep the tunnel running in the background, because otherwise our application won't be able to receive the webhook events emitted by Paradym. So in the root of the project, we can run with whatever preferred package manager you have. I'm using pnpm, run dev, which will start up both the client and the server. All right, so here we see that the server has been started on port 3000, and we also can see that the client is running on port 5173. So if we move over to our browser, we can see the game here. The high score is currently set to 2, so I will have to get at least 3 points to beat the high score. So we will do that. All right. And here we get the same screen again as in the beginning. And we'll have to wait for the credential QR code to show up, which just happened. And again, we can scan this with our wallet to receive the credential there. All right. We're at the end of this video. I hope this video gave you an idea of how to use Paradym to set up and register a credential template, as well as write a workflow to connect to a user's wallet and issue the user a credential. In the next video, we will look at setting up a verification workflow and integrate that workflow into a custom Discord server that we'll use for access management to a private Discord channel. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next one.